Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back with Gall, as always. I'm Ralph Tyko, and I have a terrific guest, one of my buddies, who is has become a usual suspect with his own radio network, and I produce about 5 or 6 of those shows, and I am so delighted that he has. He has also been a guest on my show before, and I'd like to welcome back Gabriel Schechter. How are you, sir?
I am fine, Ralph. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We have a special subject to discuss, one near to our hearts.
And we both, this is like a love for us. It's a passion. It's comes back to 1953 for me, when I was in summer camp, and I got cold or something, had to go to the infirmary, and there was an older guy at the infirmary. I was just learning baseball, and had no idea the subject, dice baseball. Al Berger taught me dice baseball, the rudimentary dice baseball. 2 and 2 is a double, that kind of thing. 6 and 6 is a home run. But what he taught me was the lineups. We played, taught me the Yankee 53 lineup and the Dodger 53 lineup. And it was kind of a fate that those two teams played they were the best teams that their respective cities had over those years. The 53 Dodgers were great. Jackie was in his prime. The 53 Yankees were right in the middle of it was the best year of the dynasty, 5 years in a row. So, point being, I learned baseball. I learned the game through dice baseball. And as it turns out, we were chatting. You and I have the same passion.
Absolutely. When you were talking about that, I recall the first dice baseball game I played was one I made up with one die. 1 and 4 were strikes, 2 and 5 was balls, 3 and 6 put the ball in play, and then the next roll was 1, 3, 5 was an out, 2, 4, 6 was a hit, and then if I had a hit, 1 was a single, 2 was it was just a very basic thing like that. But what I learned from that was what you did, lineups, and I learned scorekeeping. More important, as you and I know, compiling numbers and keeping stats from a league is, every bit as exciting as playing the games.
Now, what I'd like to know is, did you also start with All-Star Baseball? Was that a part of your youth?
No. I was a player of APBA. APA, yep, which I got when I was 11 years old in 1962, and I played that game all through high school. Memorized all 8 boards. They call me Univac because I memorized the boards. And I was avidly into that.
You're into the numbers. I do a show on this network with a fellow by the name of Michael Duca, who do the Giant Show. And Michael Duca is the official scorer, one of the major official scorers. He does all of the Giants games, most of the A's games, and not all of the Giants games. And he, like you, has that encyclopedic mind when it comes to numbers. Did anybody suggest that you'd be an official scorer? Just curious.
Believe it or not, I was the official scorer for the Hall of Fame game at Doubleday Field, one of the years that I worked at the Hall of Fame. Jim Gates, the librarian, was the regular official scorer. For some reason, he couldn't do it. And I got to be the official scorer. It was very cool because a lot of ex-major leaguers played. And I got to make one interesting scoring decision. You'll like this, Ralph. A lot of the ball players, as part of the show, they would take a kid out to the position just for an inning, just to hang out with them in the field for an inning. And I forget who it was, but he was a shortstop, and he had some little kid out there, and there was a pop-up to shortstop, and the guy let the kid catch it, but the kid dropped it, and a run scored, something like that. So I scored the error on the shortstop.
As opposed to the kid.
Right. Or as opposed to calling it a hit like you would in Little League.
Yeah. Everything.
I should do a show with that with him, because I am one of the officers of Sabres official scorers committee, and I've worked with a couple of scorers in my time, so we have some tales to tell. But we digress.
I will have you on next time Michael and I do a Giants show. I'm sure you can talk about the Giants a little bit, having lived in California a good portion of your life. You, a native New Yorker, and list some of the places. I'm fascinated by the eclectic choices you've made for a hometown. Everything from Vegas to Cooperstown itself.
Yes, and in between Las Vegas and Cooperstown, I lived in a redwood forest in the Santa Cruz Mountains, just south of Los Gatos. I had two doors, and I could touch a redwood from each door.
Wow.
It was like living in a campground. It was enchanted. So I've lived in places that people envy. I went to grad school in Oregon. I've now returned to Oregon, another wonderful place.
Yeah.
And I lived in Montana for 3 years.
Well, what part of Montana were you in?
Missoula. I taught at the University of Montana for 3 years.
Well, I don't know if you knew any chiropractors.
I hope not.
Did you know any acupuncturists in Missoula?
Not that I'm aware of, unless they, did that on the side.
Had a very close friend in the 80s who moved to Missoula, completed her course in San Francisco, and I went through Missoula, and it is absolutely God's country.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's a nice little city in a gorgeous area of the country. Western Montana is spectacular.
No question about it.
Can I digress for 2 minutes and tell you a great story from Missoula?
Sure.
I taught English, and one of my colleagues was a New Yorker and even more of a Tom Seaver fan than I was. And I was a Seaver fan to the point where I carried around all his career and season stats in my head at all times. And this fellow Stewart was even more rabid about Seaver than I was, but he didn't keep the stats in his head. He just asked me after every Seaver start things like, what's his career ERA today? That's when it was still in the 2.6 range. So one night in 1978, Seaver was going to pitch against Steve Carlton on Monday Night Baseball. And I invited Stewart and his wife over for dinner. Dinner was excellent, I assure you. We had a great time and dinner. We finished just in time for the start of the game. We settled in, and in the first inning, Seaver gave up 6 runs, capped by Carlton's 2-run single with the bases loaded, at which point Stewart went to the bathroom, threw up dinner, came out and said, "Sorry, we've got to go."
Literally threw up dinner.
Literally, it made him sick to watch Seaver get pounded.
You know, I had an equal, I didn't throw up, but I showed my emotion as a Met fan in 1986. Before Mookie's ground ball, I really dead. I really thought they were dead. And I went into the room, into my bedroom, and slammed the door and put on the radio. But I don't think my happiness was outweighed my anger and sorrow. In other words, I showed more negative emotion than I did positive emotion. And reminded of what most managers say, that it isn't, that it's something about it. It's the losing, not the winning. Thoughts. Just to be a manager. And, we take this game seriously. And don't know if you play fantasy baseball, but I do. And if you have a pitcher going, especially in the old days when you couldn't get scores and instant updates and what have you, drive around listening to the radio, and I have a pitcher going, and it's the first inning of a game, out-of-town pitcher, and I hear a score. It says it's like 6 runs in a third of an inning. Yeah, I heard. Oh, it was John Schmaltz, because that brought up my lifelong thing. I got schmaltz today.
That's good.
Schmaltz me.
It was either schmaltz or schmaltz, huh?
Right, schmaltz. You don't believe it. You don't want to believe it when you hear it too. You're waiting for it to come up. Well, maybe that wasn't the Atlanta pitcher. Maybe he didn't get the start that day. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe maybe it was somebody else. But no. We see Schmaltz, and Schmaltz good. Do you play fantasy?
Oh boy. I did for a long time, for about 15 years in various forms, and then I stopped. There were too many times when pitchers on my fantasy team pitched against my real favorite teams, and I finally gave that up. Let's talk about Superstar Baseball.
Oh yeah, one of the best board baseball games going. Its simplicity. You mentioned APA in the old days, Stratomat. This is a much more simple game and a playable game. I loved playing it. I talked off the air, and I cursory look around the house. I know my game is there. I divided the players into 6 teams, and some played every day, some platoon. You taught me from your writings recently about how some of the cards are skewed and what to look for.
Well, let me explain why I made my own set of cards. The game is played with 3 dice, and there are 216 possible results. So all the percentages and raw numbers are based on 216 chances. The pitcher rolls first and has a chance to get an automatic out, which on the original set of cards was about between a fourth and a third of the time. You could also get defensive outs based on your team's fielding rating. And what I discovered when I did the math was that the batting cards, their chances were based on X number out of 216 results. But because the pitchers were getting so many automatic outs, the corresponding percentages for the batters were lower by about one-third. So that even the best batter in the league, if he got 216 chances to swing, he might hit 370 or 380. But because he didn't get to swing 216 times out of that many plate appearances, even the best hitters in the league were going to top out at 310 or 320. Now, are you with me so far, listeners? This is really
they're facing the best pitchers. If Mays is facing Chris
exactly.
the likes of Hubble, but you assume their batting averages were going to be lower. That's how I thought of it.
Right, exactly, which leads to the next point I was going to make. That's absolutely true. The best batters against the best pitchers aren't going to fare as well, and vice versa. But what we found were that with not many exceptions, we had a lot of pitchers who couldn't seem to roll automatic numbers, and we had a lot of batters who, when they got to swing, couldn't roll an out. Jimmy Fox, for example, had only one hit number in the biggest range of possibilities. In the range covering half of the dice possibilities, he only had 12 numbers where he got hits. So that ruled out half of the rolls for him. So for all of this, what I did was I took a situation where I had pitchers who couldn't get batters out and batters who couldn't hit, and I made much better cards for the pitchers and much better cards for the hitters, so that when a pitcher is hot, when Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax is hot, he's going to pitch a dominating game. He's going to pitch a complete game, 4-hitter, 5-hitter, and strike out a dozen, which is what he should do when he's on. But when he's off, these hitters are going to pound him. So we found that instead of a lot of low-scoring games, which were exciting, all those 3-2 games were exciting, absolutely. But now we had a chance where a team might go up 6-1, and what we found was inevitably, no matter how big a lead you got early, the tying run would come to the plate at some point. And that seemed more exciting to us, and it was. So that's the essence of what I did.
Good balance. Now, more importantly to the whole overall scene is the community you developed in the around the game, in the different places you lived, community that has stayed together years. Talk a little bit, because that is such a wonderful story, and that deserves a book in itself.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, an encyclopedia and a book about the story itself. I learned the game in the early 1980s in Las Vegas, and from say 1986 on, after I created my version of the cards, the four of us played about 24 36-game seasons over the next decade. I moved away from Las Vegas in 1995, and in the next few years we played 3 reunion seasons. We gathered for a long weekend and just did nothing but play a 36-game season. And then another one moved to Australia for a long time. We had a reunion season in 2014 and another one last year. Still the same friends, and we've stayed close friends over all of these years. And it's been a very important thing in our lives. Back in the original Las Vegas days, in the late 80s, early 90s, we would meet most Friday evenings and spend the evening, and we would kind of debrief each other on our lives, and it was a chaotic time for two of us in particular, and it became almost like a support group, and then we get to play these fantastic games. And it became more important for us as a way of cementing our friendships, plus this competition for fun and money. We put up money too.
Really?
So, oh yeah, we got up to about, I think, $55 each for the season. First and second place were worth a bunch, and then we had individual statistical categories. So even if you were out of it, if you still had one good pitcher or a guy with a lot of stolen bases or home runs, you still had a chance to recoup some money. That was usually the spot I was in.
All right, let me ask you something. Before you made up the cards, and if you can go back to the original game.
Yeah.
And if you were holding a draft,
right,
who would be the first 6 players taken in the draft?
Well, certainly Ruth.
Number 1 for me. I'll start it.
Ruth, Wagner, probably number 2.
Wagner. No, who was first for you? Ruth. Okay, that was always in my head. Go for Wagner, I thought, because he's by far the best shortstop.
And he can play so many other positions.
Exactly. And he had good defensive numbers. This is why the game was great. You'd add up the individual defensive numbers that you were given, that the players had on their cards, and you'd put it in for a team, and it would affect you could actually see how, if I remember correctly, you'd roll and say, well, if the defense is 24, it's a hit. If it's less than that, that kind of thing. Am I right? The game,
yeah, more or less, yeah.
Showed defense, and that was a beautiful way of doing it. So when you're building a squad, you would look for not only offense but defense, because defense
absolutely helps. So you're running about the first half dozen, and I would say, so Ruth. I'll give you the first 4 hitters and the first 4 pitchers. How's that? So you have Ruth, Wagner, and then either Fox or Gehrig, and Cobb. And the first 4 pitchers are very clear in my mind. It would be Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, Lefty Grove, and Grover Alexander.
I learned the value of Lefty Grove from that game because he could.
Oh my God, Lefty Grove's relief card was so good, Ralph, that it became a strategy for as soon as your starter gave up a run, you bring in Grove for the rest of the game. We finally had to put in a Lefty Grove rule that no pitcher could average more than 3 innings a game. That's how good he was.
Okay.
Yeah, he would be a first round choice. Let me mention a couple of other things that I changed. That improved it for us. And one thing is the defense. On the original cards, I think the highest defensive number for any individual was 14. Guys like Tris Speaker and I think Wagner and Aparicio, guys like that. I think Aparicio might even have been a 16. Maybe that, but anyway, you would get these very high defensive numbers. And one thing I did was, in my cards, I maxed out defense at 10 points for any one player. So it created fewer defensive outs, but I just added that number to the pitcher's own arsenal. What I wanted to create was pitchers who had their numbers, so that Bob Gibson became, his card was clear to everybody. His big out numbers were 31, 33, 35. Catfish Hunter, 32, 34, 36. I would have, blocks of numbers. So that's one thing I did about defense. The other thing I did, and people who play this game, the original as you have, know this as a flaw, which is running ratings. Each player has a running rating which is used both for steals and for advancing on base hits. And that's the problem. Because you would get a guy like Roberto Clemente, who had tremendous speed, probably never made a mistake running the bases, aggressively took bases all the time, but he was not a big steals guy. So his running rating was only a 2, which was going to cut down his stolen bases, but it also made him a liability trying to take an extra base. And that was wrong. So I created separate running numbers for steals and extra bases. So Clemente still has a low rating for steals, but he's a 5 for advancing on bases. And that's much more realistic.
Yeah. Now, we are, or you do, kind of take it to the next level. If one were out there listening to this and were deciding on buying a board game, if you just bought the original, and didn't add cards to it or anything, and didn't change the ratings or anything, you'd have a hell of a game.
It was a great game. Yeah. My friends George and Sue had played the game for 5 or 6 years before I met them. And, all the leagues we played were exciting. They tended to be low-scoring games because Lefty Grove pitched so much. And
another player that really showed himself, Stan
Kovaleski. Yeah.
I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but
Kovaleski, yeah.
Kovaleski. Good pitcher in that game, and you do a little research if you have a curiosity of baseball, not just playing a board game. To look into these guys' lives a little bit. It's a motivate.
Oh, absolutely.
Lefty Grove. He impressed me so much that I'd start using him as an example of an underrated player in real life. Go to his stats, and he had amazing stats in real life as well, not just the cards.
Oh, yeah, I did the same thing. That was a time, especially when I went to make the cards, where I spent a lot of time in the encyclopedias, really studying the careers. And, I made these cards 30 years ago, and I want to make a final definitive set because now, thanks to websites like baseballreference.com and retrosheet.org, we have complete right and left-handed splits, breakdowns. And as you know, each batter has a different rating against righty and lefty pitching. And back then, I could only...
It's what makes... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of the best things about the game. But I didn't have...
Baseball itself, platoon, Casey Stengel, juggling infielders and what have you. It's what makes it much like chess.
Absolutely. In our leagues, you would get a first base platoon, say, of Orlando Cepeda and Keith Hernandez. Beautiful. Beautiful. But because I didn't have the splits, for example, Billy Williams, great lefty hitter, but, I gave him a fair differential against righties and lefties. Well, now I have found out he had exactly the same batting average against righties and lefties. More power against righties, but the same batting average. So now I have the precise numbers for breaking down not only hits versus righties and lefties, but type of hits, sacrifice fly data, all kinds of stuff where I can now produce a definitive set of cards. But that is
the one guy they didn't have was DiMaggio, so I had my friend basically reproduced a Joe DiMaggio card. And
yeah, he would not license his name. He was very particular about stuff like that.
I know he was. As a matter of fact, my brother, the tax attorney, worked for the guy in Florida. My brother's an accountant, and he worked as an accountant in the firm of, I can't think of his name, the guy who ran DiMaggio's life later in life.
Engelberg. Morris
right?
Engelberg.
Right. And my brother...
Do I get a bonus question?
20 points for that. Okay, what's my brother's middle name?
Albert.
Actually, they didn't even write it down. They wanted to name him Ben, and they didn't write it on the birth certificate. So, in essence, it could have been Albert.
For all we know, huh?
For all we know. Maybe subliminally they wanted Albert. But he'd go in, and DiMaggio would come in the office and just wander around. Because all he came in for was to sit there for an hour or two and sign baseballs. And then get up and walk around and go back. Morris had him as an autograph machine at that time. But DiMaggio was this regal person. Wherever he was, you could see him in the men's room, and he was regal. But he'd never know people's names, and he'd pass you in the hall. My brother would say, and he'd go, "Hello there." Hello there. As if he were talking down to the bad boy.
Yeah.
Hello there. I've had actions with him at the Hall of Fame.
Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
You must have had interactions with him at the Hall of Fame.
With whom?
DiMaggio.
No, he died a few years before I got there.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah. No, so no. Hey, guess what? I was rummaging around the box, Ralph. I was rummaging around the box here, and I fished out a Jackie Robinson card. Wow. And what we're talking about is in the 30 column, which covers half of the dice possibilities, he has 9 chances out of 108 to get a base hit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, did I read on your blog somebody who commented on your excellent writing about the subject. It's what's the blog? How can people get to it? Tell us, Gabriel.
Thanks, Ralph. The blog site is charlesapril.com. Charles like Comiskey and April is in the month.com, and archived on the right, go to April 2014, and click on that, and you'll see the 4-part history of Rust Ball. Ironically, we called it Rust Ball because my friend George had a son that year named Russell, and I wanted to make this as a baseball legacy for Russell. I called it Rust Ball, and the criterion for getting a card was had to be a player that George and I could describe from having seen. So the cutoff was kind of the late 50s, early 60s. Some guys we remembered well enough to include, like Warren Spahn. Others not so much, like Eddie Matthews didn't get a card. We just didn't really have a good enough image. So it became the players from the 60s through the 80s. And I added on a few as we went along. But it's been that same core of players.
Nice. You don't have any of those players living where you do in Oregon?
I don't think so. One guy who might have gotten a card, Rick Wise, still lives up in Portland. That's where he's from. I'm not. What do you mean? Oh, the people I played with?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Two of them, George and Sue, are still in Las Vegas. They've spent their whole lives there. And Tim was the one who moved to Australia for a while. He married a great woman from Australia. And they now live near Boulder, Colorado. So we're a little bit scattered now. When I went back to Las Vegas last spring for the reunion, it was a 1,000-mile drive.
Wow. We all came from different places.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you play baseball computer simulation games?
You know, there was a time, 15 years ago or so when I got involved in it a bit, but what I didn't like about that is one of the things that's best about the dice games is that you have to plug in a bunch of default strategies to play the computer simulations, and then the computer makes the decisions. The joy of dice ball is that you are the manager, you're the general manager. We used to make all kinds of trades, some blockbuster trades, and you're making all the decisions. So that's the thing I didn't like about the computer games.
On the upside, they keep all the stats for you and compile.
Oh, but Ralph, keeping the stats was the most fun for me. I was the scorekeeper and the record keeper, and spending a few hours. We would play, say, 9 games apiece, and spending a few hours going through the box scores, compiling all the stats for all the players was just as much fun as playing the games for me. So I wouldn't give that up to a computer for anything.
Well, for me, in whatever league I ever played in, fantasy leagues and what have you, most fun is drafting, setting up the league, working with players once it was drafted. I love doing that sort of stuff. But I have a certain ADD that it's really a chore for me to sit there and transcribe the box score to a permanent record. But it's just my makeup. I'm just built differently.
Well, it's definitely time consuming, and if it isn't fun, you shouldn't do it. For me, it's a lot of fun.
Right.
Ralph, if we ever meet, I will show you my loose leaf notebook, with the Encyclopedia of Rustball. It's about, it's over 200 pages. And it includes Rustball's greatest games. It's 125 games, with the original written, score sheet, a newspaper-style box score, and a newspaper write-up for each of these great games.
Well, what you've done in your blog about Rustball is basically talk about your Hall of Famers. Mention them. Who are in the Hall of Fame?
Well, at this point, almost everybody is, but since we gave the top hitters and pitchers that were drafted in the original, I can tell you that Willie Mays and Hank Aaron were always the first two choices in one order or the other. And because George and Stu were from Pittsburgh, if either one of them drafted third, it would be Roberto Clemente. And then after that, the next few hitters drafted would be Mickey Mantle, Frank Robinson in the outfield. In the infield, it would be Mike Schmidt, George Brett, Joe Morgan, and a host of first basemen. Johnny Bench would be and Yogi Berra would be the first two catchers. The pitchers, the starting pitchers were quite a loaded core. But the first ones would be Sandy Koufax, Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, Steve Carlton, probably the first four, Juan Marichal, Bob Gibson. And the big relievers were Bruce Sutter, Dennis Eckersley, Tug McGraw, Sparky Lyle. So there you go.
Pretty much matches up with real life. And
yeah.
Baseball is the only sport where you can transcend those statistics and get a realistic idea of how a ball player is. Can't do that with statistics in baseball. Certainly in hockey, football, because there are more intangibles.
Right.
That aren't recorded.
Well, one of the reasons for that is that for the difference is that in baseball, for batters, the number of opportunities to do something are roughly equal. You're going to get up 4 or 5 times a game. Whereas a great running back, if his team falls behind, he might only carry the ball 10 times.
Exactly.
Basketball player might get in foul trouble and not get his minutes. But baseball, a guy in the lineup is always going to get his 4 acts. Right.
It's a great sport.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody's definition, it's a year-round joy to be a baseball fan, because when they're not playing, and they will be in 30 days or so. But Hot Stove League is, for me, shows like this, talking about what we're talking about, it's every bit as good as a real baseball game sometimes.
Oh, sure. I agree.
Today more so. Gabriel, thank you. What do you call it? One of the regulars, or one of the usual subjects. That was you.
Usual suspects.
And Gabriel will be guesting. We're going to record it tomorrow and put it up in a day or so after that. George Case has a show on this network where we talk hot stove baseball. George Case is the son of George Case Jr. He's George Case III. And
Ralph, can I just plant one more thought on you?
Sure.
A perspective on how great this game was, the original and our version. many, many times watching ball games, especially in the postseason, and it happened quite often in October. I would watch a game unfold, especially in the late innings, and go, man, that was a Rust Ball game. Think of that 8-6 Boston-Houston game that went 13 innings with the amazing catches in the last inning and all the to and fro, and it was a perfect illustration of our slogan in Rust Ball, which Sue coined, and it goes like this: every win a miracle, every loss a blow. And think how often that applies to the games we watch.
Right. Again, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Here of Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We'll get to talk tomorrow. We, like I say on the Case Show, we have a little hot stove league, and you fit right in. Thank you for being a part of all of this, and talk tomorrow.
Sounds good, Ralph.
All right. If you're listening, thank you. If you want to do something nice, if you enjoy any of our offerings, and want to give back a little bit, would you please box up some new or lightly used children's books and take them to the Head Start program wherever you are. You get a bunch of books, you put them in a box. You can't imagine how that helps kids develop an imagination, get their noses out of the devices and the computers, become school ready, and make a difference in this here world. The kids at Head Start need a head start by definition. So if you could do anything socially in a world that, I don't mean to scare anybody, it's not socialism, but you could still do something nice, and it's in a world that desperately needs it. So I thank you for that, listeners, and like I say, the network is Comfortably Zoned. The show is The Gall of the Man, and I have the gall to fight the unholy trinity of big business, organized religion, and government. I kind of identify it and put it in its place every now and again. So if you're looking for a podcast to listen to on a regular basis, tune us in. If you want to go to our website, it's comfortablyzonedradio.com. Gabriel Schechter, thank you again for being a terrific guest.
Thank you, Ralph.
Be well, everybody.